nice memes, guys.
I guess.
Okay.
I'll post whatever Instagram picture I have on my phone at the moment.
I guess we
Alright.
can begin. So
Nick, do you like my haircut? Oh, shit, sorry.
What?
Nothing.
So, this morning, Left Side and I and a few other people on the Mock Government Discord had a bit of a debate over the SMS on free speech, and Left Side says that he doesn't agree with the First Amendment. So I'm just going to let him talk about that, and then I'll offer whatever I have to say.
No, we shouldn't let him speak if he doesn't believe in free speech.
Good one.
Anyway.
I didn't, strictly speaking, say I didn't believe in free speech. It was regarding Nazis, if I recall correctly.
No,
Right.
that's not acceptable. You're a communist.
So
Oh.
you can just present your conviction, and then I'll respond, and then anyone else can respond.
Okay, so my whole thing was like, free speech is very important. We should absolutely value history, but when it comes to National Socialism or Nazism, I don't think that public rallies and demonstrations of support for Nazism should be allowed. And the reason I think that is because if you give people a public platform to promote their ideology, even if it's an ideology that is inherently hateful and pro genocide, then you're allowing that ideology to spread in at least some way. And if you ban it, even what you do is a lot of people say, oh yeah, if you ban it, it'll get more popular anyway, because whatever reason. I'm sure there'll be many great reasons, but if you drive the force underground and it's out of the public light, if it's out of the public light, then the movement has no way to grow in the public.
Okay. Steve can make his conviction, and then I can make a conviction to that statement.
You mean a
Okay.
rebuttal?
Oh yeah, rebuttal, whatever.
Okay. So
Can I make a conscription?
Description.
yes, you can conscript yourself into the military. We'll never see you again.
Sorry, they don't like homosexuals in the military, I'm pretty sure, though.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Anyway,
Wait, you're homo?
No. Are you?
Okay, good.
Oh, I was about to say, take him out in the back and shoot him.
Yeah, you better not be a homo.
No.
so the problem that I have with that is, well, first of all, let me just say that I agree with you in the sense that Nazism is a repugnant ideology, which really shouldn't be in the public eye anyway, but you can't ban it, because if you ban it, it'll just drive it underground. And then, you have a movement which was originally just venting its anger at the system, and you've turned it into something which is maybe sort of a little bit legitimate because the system is rejecting it in such a visceral way. And you get people who ordinarily wouldn't support it going, hey, wait a minute, now that they banned that, they might ban me. Maybe I should support that movement so that, this train of censorship stops at this station and not a station far down the line. Also, I think if there's a bad idea circulating around in society, the best thing to do is to argue against it. And even though the ideologues might not take your arguments and internalize them and change their own beliefs, the people who would otherwise, who are not ideologues, the people standing in the middle, are going to be convinced that this is an idea which is bad and shouldn't be propagated, right? So the small minority of ideologues, yes, won't change, but the vast majority of people who are not, radical left-wingers or radical right-wingers will be swayed to do the intellectual equivalent of laughing at that ideology and those beliefs. So I think the two options we have are either argue against them, and if it is a legitimate idea, then it should be, included in the public discourse. But I don't think Nazism is, in my opinion, and probably everyone else's opinion here. So I don't think banning Nazi speech or Nazi demonstrations is the right way to go about it at all.
Well, and another point I want to make is you said that if you shove it underground, then it will be out of the public light. Well, young men, you have to understand that young men are very adventurous and they like danger and stuff. And so when you present them with an opportunity to join a group which is hated amongst society, and they know they can fight for something which they think is a real cause. Like, let me give you an example. ISIS, right? It's poor, disenfranchised men who feel like they are part of something greater when they fight for ISIS, which is why you have lone wolves making attacks throughout the world.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, the issue I have with the statement of saying if it goes underground, it will just grow, is that this, for another movement, for example, whether it's a moderate, if we ban like moderate conservatism, for example, of course, if that were to go underground, it would grow very, very big, because the ideology is one that's commonly quite popular anyway. It's one that isn't completely unreasonable. But the thing is, with Nazism, if it's shoved underground, then the people who would otherwise feel disenfranchised by the government, for example, would struggle, wouldn't necessarily go to these sorts of underground events, because if it's out of the public eye, if they're not demonstrating and venting their anger at the government, then why bother? They would find other means to do so, which would not involve Nazism. And that's when government outreach comes in, I think.
On top of that, in a perfect world, I mean, we can imagine that if there was a neo-Nazi group protesting and holding rallies and such, ideally the public would be able to handle it their own way, right? We would assume that there would be counter-protesters and such. Now, I imagine in an alternate reality, not one like our own, there might be a group of people calling themselves anti-fascists who would attempt such a thing and then be radicalized in their own way. I mean, this would never happen in real life, of course. I feel like we should call this, I'd call it Antifa for short. And what they would be attempting to do is, under their flag, they would be attempting to fight fascism. And I mean, I feel like there would be a chance that if, say in a world where we left people to their own devices and have them create the counter-protesters and stop the movement and not drive them underground, then maybe these people like Antifa and such, I mean, completely fictional group, of course, could possibly cause their own damage and in their own way become a dangerous radical group, thus proving the point that without some sort of government intervention, it leads to further damage and doesn't actually solve the problem. Well, driving them underground in an efficient and maybe democratic manner might be the best solution.
Well, the problem with Antifa isn't the existence. What? Well, the
I just made that up, Nick. I don't know what you're talking about.
What is Antifa?
The problem with your hypothetical reality of Antifa, in which perhaps a hypothetical rally of white nationalists turned violent after a group of hypothetical anti-fascist protesters came in and they started clashing in the streets. Well, the problem with that reality...
Where'd you get that idea?
I just made it up.
Alright.
The problem with that proposal, let's say, is not the existence of free speech. It's a weak mayor who doesn't, want to use the police force in the proper manner. Because I think, to a degree, if this were hypothetically to occur, it would be the fault of the police force that the violence occurred, because they didn't go in and immediately try to stop it. I think in any rally where there's violence, let it be white nationalists, anti-fascists, homosexuals, mothers with rolling pins, I don't know, in any demonstration of free speech that then turns into violent action, people don't have the right to use violent action against other people for no reason.
The culture, the whole culture of anti-fascism and neo-Nazism still exists even without the violent protests, and that's the issue.
Well,
what do you mean
without violent protests?
The thing is that with what you saw in the 1930s was when the brown shirts and the red shirts would clash, support for the brown shirts would actually grow because people wanted a restoration of public order.
Right, actually, the anti-fascists in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, when they were clashing with the Nazis, more often than not, the communists would win the fight. But the Nazis won the country because they gained public sympathy, because they were being beaten up by these horrible communists, and people needed to vote for the Nazis because, well, we can't let the communists take over the country, obviously. So, never underestimate public sympathy when you're trying to drive a group underground. Well,
And
that might come back to bite you in the ass.
You've kind of proved my point with that, though, because if you think, so for example, the white nationalists and Antifa in this hypothetical world, this fight going on. Sorry, can we just stop that now? It's kind of
the joke went too far.
Yeah, so with Antifa and the white nationalists, what you had immediately afterwards was a lot of backlash from both sides becoming very fierce, even more physically opposed to each other than before. All that does is generate more hate, more anger. So what does that happen? So the next protest is going to be a bigger fight, the next one, and so on and so forth. So not driving it underground and leaving it out in the open.
But the issue is you would only drive one underground. You would only drive the Nazis underground. You wouldn't drive Antifa underground. And when they have done a lot more violent, they've committed a lot more violent actions than the one guy who drove a car into a group of people. And Antifa has been known for smuggling knives and constantly assaulting people they disagree with.
Okay, but being ideologically neutral here, let's imagine you do send one underground, whether that be Antifa or the white nationalists. What you get is a lack of violence on the streets because there is no counter-protest. However, that being said, of course, there is a problem of when you only have one group out in the street, then that group is obviously going to get more public support.
Which group do you determine is non-violent and non-radical?
Well, I have one problem with this whole thing about banning one specific ideology's ability to peacefully assemble. You can't just limit their freedom. It's not something you can just do. It is their freedom. You cannot take that away from them because of their ideological beliefs. If they're not being violent, if they're not causing any trouble directly, they're not doing any wrong.
Think about what the real fascist action is here, right? You're the one doing the good thing, saying, well, if you don't think a certain way, you're going to be shoved underground and you could be arrested. That's a fascist action. And another thing is, you would rather... You're okay with banning Nazis, but not communists. And communists have killed far more people than the Nazis ever did. And if you say, well, most of the famines were unintentional, the intentional people they killed still amounted to millions more than what the Nazis killed. And you have groups of people like Antifa who openly support the Soviet Union, and you're okay with banning the Nazis, which is a group of 20 people, but not Antifa, which is actually growing in prevalence, and the media is tending to support now.
But what I'm saying is that when you have a group like the Nazis, sure, you can question communism all you like, you can question the acts of Soviet Union, Stalin, Mao, whoever. However, when you look, and obviously I think that was actually deplorable and such, but when you look at the ideology of communism, whether you agree with its economics or not, it's not inherently evil. The problem with Nazism is
it preaches the hate of the rich.
Well, that's your interpretation of it. With the Nazis, it's
there it is
for the genocide of Jews.
There it is. You just said that's your interpretation of it. That's how it goes all around. Okay, not all National Socialists support Hitler. Not all National Socialists believe that the Holocaust was a good thing. I have met several National Socialists online who condemn Hitler and his actions, and they think he was an idiot, but they still hold the National Socialist ideology.
Well, then they're not National Socialists because they're not.
They are National Socialists because they subscribe to the system of belief of economics and social authority. That doesn't mean
they go for all of it, or you don't.
I think there's a bit of a okay. So, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think there's not just the issue of fascism, authoritarianism, and censoring, specifically trying to censor that, as much as the advocation for violence, racism, bigotry, and Nazism is paired with both racism and fascism. But if you look at something like the KKK, for example, they were very much, have been driven not necessarily underground, but loathed by the general populace extremely because while they don't advocate fascism, they advocate racism. And the issue is when you sign it, you can easily, everybody can say they don't want racism in politics, or they don't want a racist protest. Well, it's harder for them to say they don't want a neo-Nazi protest, because you're not only arguing against racism when you're arguing against a neo-Nazi, you're also arguing against a political ideology. And many people believe that you shouldn't just shoot somebody down for the political ideology. So the neo-Nazis are given an extent of freedom of thought, because they also have an idea of what form of government they desire and such as well.
I'm not saying they can't be Nazis, just in their own time.
Could you let Steve do a response? He hasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to bring up. Earlier you said
Steve.
that. Yeah. Earlier, Left Side, you said that it's Freethy's interpretation that communism perpetuates hate and evil and whatnot. Well, it's your interpretation that Nazism is all of these things. And if you say, well, I think Nazism is the worst ideology and should be censored because of this, this, and this, you'll meet someone else who says, well, I'm a Nazi and I think communism is the worst, or I think democracy is the worst because of this, this, and this. Are they all valid? Are none of them valid? Are you valid? I mean, you have no way of knowing, because everyone has their biases. And the only way, the best way, in my opinion, to ensure that there's no oppression being done to anyone, with considering the fact that everyone is biased, is just to have unrestricted free speech, and anyone can argue against anyone they want, and then that produces the best ideas will come out on the top. Right,
Well,
so
I think... Okay, go ahead.
I don't think it's ethical to ban anyone based on their beliefs, because you don't know whether you're valid or they're valid, so the only way to figure that out is to argue with them.
I mean, people always choose the best options, such as anti-vaccinations and flat Earth.
But you can argue against people who are flat earthers. You don't need the government to ban their thoughts.
And you can also argue against Nazis, but it doesn't stop them from taking over the government, does it?
I will just say this right quick.
Well, if they hold on though, if they manage to take over the government, then they've won a public debate in some sense.
Thus, they're right.
Thus, they're right in that context because they won the public debate. Do you think there's some sort of there's some sort of cheat sheet that you can check every ideology and every situation off of?
I think there are some ideologies which will manipulate people, lie to people, and use their fear, and they aren't right in any way. They are manipulating people, and that's how they win over power. People aren't perfect, and the world isn't perfect, and propaganda, abuse of media, abuse of
like
diplomatic powers exists, in which these ideologies, which regardless of any cheat sheet or anything, the majority of people in hindsight would look at them and consider them completely wrong, such as the neo-Nazis and communism and Stalinism and Maoism.
Yes, but that's subjective.
They gain power anyway.
You could say this about any ideology ever. You could say this about literally any ideology.
I'm pretty sure I'm not going to say that about democracy anytime soon.
Yeah, but someone would. There is no objective ideology.
Well, yes, but with some ideologies, there's no ambiguity as to whether it's evil or not. The proof really is in the pudding, as it were. If you...
Let's
go ahead.
Let me put it like this to you. I don't agree with your ideology. Would it be okay for me to limit your freedoms and not allow you to combine with other people who believe in your ideology so you can gain popularity or power? Would that be
if I subscribe to an ideology that's historically proven to be objectively, in my own eyes, not objectively evil, objectively leading and usually adhering to the idea of, say, genocide?
You can't use fascism to fight fascism.
It's not fascism, it's racism. I'm saying don't look at just the idea of fascism within Nazism. Look at the idea of racism and stuff. The implementation, of what they want to do it's necessary for them to be fascist to implement their ideology, for them to want certain races to be above others, for them to want certain people to have less rights than others. To implement those ideas, they need fascism. Now, if you look at a democratic society, we have, as a last resort, or as at least in a time of great need, an authoritarian action is necessary in a democracy to stop something like that happening, because we know the road it will lead down. There is historical evidence to prove that what road this will lead down.
Well, Ryan, both you and I agree that fascism is bad for various reasons that I won't get into. Both you and I agree that racism is bad for various reasons that I won't get into.
Mm-hmm.
But bad is subjective. There are people out there who don't think either of those things are bad. And I'm withholding judgments on those people, although I do have judgments on those people. I'm withholding judgments on those people for this conversation because what is democracy? It's a decision-making process. And if you can convince enough people of a certain thing, then they're likely to decide to implement that thing. And I think, although Nazism in itself is inherently unethical, I also think it's inherently unethical to prevent the spread of ideas from occurring naturally. Because in the event where the majority of people in your democracy believe in a certain idea, maybe it's Nazism, maybe it's communism, maybe it's anarcho-fascism or whatever, I don't know, then that idea is liable to be implemented. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's democracy. It's a decision-making process.
So, okay.
I think as much as anything, also what we've got to remember is we're not dealing with any ideology. I think there's a lot of sort of word tossing about here, saying, "Oh, yes, if this is okay, then censoring socialism, for example, must be okay." I think the whole point of my argument is not saying, "Okay, if I disagree with this ideology, we should ban it." I'm saying that if we're looking at an ideology that is promoting the gassing of an entire race, if we're looking at an ideology that inherently believes that there should only be one race, then having that in the public eye and giving a political platform potentially into power is completely it's completely wrong. If
Well,
I
I think
think
this is a specific case.
Get into power, then we can repeat history's mistakes. I'm not saying
The case with
Nazism is
historical
cool.
precedents. We may say, I genuinely don't think there would be a set precedent that we will then shut down further sorts of ideological protests and stuff. I'm talking specifically about neo-Nazism because we have historical precedent of exactly what happens in a democratic, within a democratic, government when Nazism specifically uses people's fear and uses the power that they have granted by the government to implement their ideology. I wouldn't.
The freedoms created by democracy are fallible because they are so open to manipulation by groups like Nazis.
I truly believe that there is no way that we can escape some sort of fascist revolution in any type of country. If we go the route that Leslie wants to go, that will just make the government more authoritarian and get them more power to become even more fascist. Or we just let the fascism grow year by year, day by day, and one day having any seats in Congress or possibly even having a Nazi president. But it's more likely...
It's been through this period, though, 33 to 45. This period has passed.
So why do you even care about trying to stop it if you know you can't stop it?
We can.
We can't stop it.
On the topic of historical precedents, that would be a great argument to bring up if you are actually discussing the disadvantages of, say, Nazism or fascism. If you're arguing against Nazism in the free market of ideas, right, where there is free speech, you can bring up to people who either are Nazis or are liable to become Nazis the fact that this has been tried before, that it hasn't worked, that it has led to the deaths, subjugation, oppression, of millions of people based on nothing but their inherent characteristics that they had no control over, which is all true. And you can bring that up, and if your argument is good, then more people will say, hey, that's a good argument, and I don't think I want to associate with Nazis anymore, or listen to what they have to say because I've heard, the horrors of Nazism. And
What is
this is essentially how free speech works in the domain of essentially the free market of ideas, right? So if it's a good idea, it'll rise to the top. If it's a bad idea, like Nazism, it'll go to the bottom.
And if we're trying to outlaw subscribing to extremist ideologies, then you cannot say that you want to ban Nazism without banning communism.
Oh, also,
Yeah,
I
going
just
back
I
to
just
the-
remembered what I was going to say before that I forgot. On the subject of, well, the communist ideology isn't inherently wanting genocide, and the all those deaths that were caused were done by accident or whatever. Actually, in the beginning, Hitler didn't want to exterminate all the Jews; he just wanted to deport them. So that's sort of the same.
Well, yes, but Hitler isn't Nazism. Nazism contains Nazi Party contained Hitler. Remember, it was also very large, and remember that there were people more extreme than Hitler in the Nazi Party during this time.
That's true, but the predominant ideals of what we would call Nazism today arose out of the majority of those ideas arose out of Adolf Hitler's philosophy.
Well, that doesn't stop the fact that the neo-Nazis now, though they worship Hitler, they don't worship specifically what he believed in, which is the deporting of Jews. They worship what he did, which was kill them.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of missing the point. My point is that the intentions were not the same as the results in both cases of Nazism and communism.
If we quickly go back to the point where we said that if we allow free speech, then Nazis will automatically be shot down because their argument is so invalid or ludicrous. That didn't stop Hitler.
Yeah, but he had no historical precedent.
Okay,
That was the first time they were trying it.
Okay, try it. Yes, but of course. But if you're looking at a free democratic system, if that's your argument, then it's automatically fallible. It doesn't work because as long as you have a democratic system, you will always have people who will see its flaws and its fallibilities. So of course you will have people like Hitler, and if they have a platform to operate, then there's a potential for them to get very, very big.
The big issue is you're giving the government the power to basically put a gun to someone's head and say, you have to think this way. And when you give the government the power, things get out of control pretty quickly.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying ban it in public. Be a Nazi in your own time if you want. I don't care.
It's not believing it. It's not. It's the same way.
You obviously care. You don't want these people to believe in this idea. I don't want them to believe in this ideology, but that doesn't give me the right to silence them. They have the freedom to grow, and if we don't give them that freedom, then we're just as bad as them.
Well, no, I think if we look at the
I'm not trying to be a pragmatist or anything, but I just think that you are wrong here.
No, sure.
Well, I would hope so if you're arguing.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you ban it and then you're at the beginning you're still going to have people that follow the Nazi ideology, and then as soon as you ban an ideology in public such as Nazism, you have to follow through with it in the education system. If you follow through with it like that and you show from an early age, look at this ideology, look how evil it is, then you're much more likely to produce. And this comes back to, in fact, a socialist issue, which is equal education for all and whatnot. So if you give people the opportunity in deprived areas where Nazism may well be allowed to grow, if you give them the opportunity to see the horrors that it produces, then banning it and then education work hand in hand, because in that case you can abolish the ideology altogether.
That actually is a good point, because in the United States, having been put through the education system here, we do talk a lot about Nazism and the horrors of the Holocaust. A lot. But my question is, when you have another ideology similar to Nazism in that it's a collectivist ideology, which has its roots in identitarianism, say communism, for example, they don't teach against communism as much as they teach against Nazism, which I lament, because they're very similar strands of thought, except instead of nationalism, you have class consciousness. You just flip those, and then you have basically an interchangeable system. But I think
Just 'cause-
that if
Good.
no if you were to say, well, we can't, have the teachers talking about communism in classes because communism isn't an inherently bad idea. Well, how do you know Nazism isn't an inherently bad idea? Like, where are you getting your source here?
Going on the things of education, I just did this randomly, and there might not be a correlation. We can argue about that in a second. But looking at the map of literacy among the U.S., I'm looking specifically at the southern part where Texas has 19% literacy, basic prose, has below basic literacy skills. 19% of Texas has below literacy skills. Texas also has the highest amount of neo-Nazis in the U.S. I think
Are you also looking at a statistic that says that?
Yeah, I'm looking at a map of that as well. Yes, there's not a map that points both those things out. I wouldn't trust that map to begin with.
Is it relevant to the population?
I want to bring this up specifically because I think that not educating people that Nazis are bad per se, but educating people about what the Nazis actually are is what's necessary to stop neo-Nazism.
Absolutely.
I think maybe not banning neo-Nazis from protesting and such would be the best solution, really. I do agree that, I think that I want a solution. I don't want a specific solution, but a solution such as the idea of educating people about what the Nazis did, what the communists did, whichever you want, educating people about these historical precedents in general would reduce it. We can't argue with people on a political platform. We can't argue a bunch of 30-year-olds in a political, platform like that. But we can teach them before they turn 30, before they join a neo-Nazi organization, what the Nazis actually did and what they actually stood for, and then we wouldn't have the neo-Nazis to begin with. Educating them and showing them the wrongs that they did is what needs to happen, maybe.
We can't just say that the Nazis killed Jews and that's why they're bad. We have to actually teach our children what they did and why that was bad for Germany.
Well,
and we also have to do this for communism too, because they're two ideologies. We can't give one of them a bias.
I agree with you in the broad sense, but I just have to point out that you made a few logical leaps that maybe were too large of a.
I may have implied that the teachers would be saying that the Nazis are wrong.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
When you say that the lower literacy rates in Texas correlate with the highest number of white supremacists or neo-Nazis, as you put it, you're making the leap of
causation.
Right, of causation there. And also you're saying that literacy rates correlate with
neo-Nazism. No, I said that before that we could argue about that.
Historical knowledge.
Right. I'm saying specifically that maybe a possible. I'm not going to argue whether or not neo-Nazism is directly correlated to whether or not people know how to read, or how well educated they are in history class. I'm saying that if we try harder, we might see a correlation between increased literacy rates and increased distaste towards the ideas of historically, and in my eyes, subjectively wrong ideologies such as communism and Nazism.
Oh yeah. I think if we have a more comprehensive reading of history in public schooling, like if we teach people about not only the Holocaust genocide and what the reality of the Nazi regime was, but if we also teach them the reality, who's making all that background noise?
Can you stop fucking your dog for 1 second?
I think that's civilized. Hold on. Okay. If you also teach people about the realities of life under the Soviet Union and communist China and Mongolia and every other place that we would consider distasteful from an ideological perspective, then you would have a more complete picture of history, and you would better be able to judge for yourself whether these points of view are good for society or not. But I think that's getting a little bit detached from the original point of freedom of speech.
I have to leave like right now to go to work and stuff. But I'm gonna like leave off with still on the specific topic that while I don't know how I stand the idea of stopping protests and such and in the exact like whether or not that might violate free speech, but I think I stand on the idea that while we should try and maybe not stop people to think about, maybe not tell people what to think about Nazism, but maybe teach them how to think about it.
Right.
So I have to go. I'm sorry. Okay. Goodbye.
All
It's
right.
because I showed up, isn't it?
Thanks for coming. Hey, Conley.
Hey, Conley, we were just talking about how great Nazism is.
Well, see you guys later.
No, wait, hold on.
Sign the petition.
Wait, hold up. I got a message. All right, what's up? Say that again.
We're talking about free speech and the First Amendment.
All right, guys. I'm gonna see you later.
Conley doesn't like freedom of speech, so that's why he's leaving.
Nah, I'm just messing with you. So what's up?
All right.
We were talking about left side was talking about how I think so at least, how he think that we should ban Nazis or neo-Nazis from having public rallies and things like that. And we were having a debate about that.
What? So do you want my opinion or
No,
or
not
you
really.
just want
You
me to
can
sit
join
back?
in. We're probably going to continue the 8 values test actually after this. I might make it in a separate
Yeah,
video.
how about
But you
like
can stay
at
for that.
4:20? Can we do that at 4:20?
Well, I'm doing my work, so I'm gonna set this iPad up against something and just listen. Unless you actually want my opinion on something.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't
you can
really.
you can put your input in at any time.
Yeah, I'll just listen.
Great, we get to hear Conley's opinions on things.
All right.
I only have the word atheist in all caps.
So right now, Conley, we're talking about the censorship of Nazis.
Right. So left side, do you have anything else to say? Anything that you would like to offer out to anyone?
Well, I think the whole thing goes back to this point of when we're teaching it in schools, the distinction between Nazism being bad and communism being bad. And I don't like to repeat myself here. Nazism is obviously an inherently evil ideology, but of course we should look at the lessons from Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, and the Kims even. As examples of communism done badly. Now, Nazism as a counter, it can never be done well by definition. And what I mean by done well is it can never avoid mass genocide. It can never avoid, the slaughter of millions. It's an inherently evil ideology. And that's why I think that whatever your political opinion is, you shouldn't be, and I really don't want to come across as like a communist sympathizer here, but I don't think you should be knocking certain strands of communism just because you disagree with it. With the Nazi stuff, I think there is very good reason to.
Well, here's my problem with that. Here's my problem with that, because you see this seems to be a recurring thing in this conversation. You take the presupposition that Nazism is an inherently evil ideology. And while I may agree with you on that in the general sense, you have to understand that there are many people out there who don't hold that same presupposition when they're having a conversation.
And it's educate
right?
them. Educate them then.
Yes, yeah, no,
As we're saying.
right. But some people might say that communism is an inherently evil ideology, and there are others who might say that democracy is an inherently evil ideology. But we can't just work off presuppositions when we're talking about who should and should not be able to hold rallies. I think when you're talking about Nazis and arguing with Nazis, you can't just say, well, you're evil, case closed. Well, they obviously have reasons to believe what they believe, and if you just ban them just on the face of, well, they're evil, so they don't need to speak, you're ignoring a lot of what they have to say. And while I don't personally agree with what they have to say, other people might. And if you expose what they believe to the public, then there's an even greater chance that they would be that they would have social pressure against them, and that their ideas wouldn't.
I have an idea about this. if a neo-Nazi rally, if say the white nationalists are trying to hold a rally, say in Charlottesville or New York, a very liberal left, it's a left city. And I think before they give the warnings out, like they can't pull licenses to you can't deny a person the right to protest. But I think that when they're asking for permits to rally, I think you should have like a friendly warning of like, you do realize this is like an extremely liberal town, right? Or you do realize like most of the population here will not agree with this, which could break out in a fight, right? So you're held accountable for this. I'd say that, but I don't like in Charlottesville. Obviously, the left side started it first. I'm going to give them that, but I think both sides were in the wrong here. Like that one deadly crash accident. So to prevent more of those, I think we need to make sure that people know their audience.
Yeah.
For once, I agree with Conley.
Yeah, but Conley, you can agree that all people, regardless of their ideology, should have the right to protest peacefully.
I said that you should have full licenses to rally.
Well, I just want to clarify that left side actually doesn't believe that. He thinks that people who are Nazis shouldn't have the right to hold rallies, and that's the topic of
Steve, he can have that view.
Yes, I know, which is one of the reasons I'm arguing for unrestricted free speech, is because I support the right to everyone for everyone to hold and advocate whatever views that they want.
And I agree.
I mean,
in all honesty, I think we're going around in circles now. We should probably go to the eight values.
Right.
Agreed.
So